next thought went to what's going on. We need to find these cowards who did this, and we need to put them away. Very emotional reaction.
When the local Liberal Member of Parliament, Vince Gasparro, first got word of the March 7th midnight drive-by gunfire at the Sharei Shemayim synagogue in his riding, the attack wasn't just shocking, it was personal. He says his heart dropped. Then, when he heard nobody was hurt or killed, he got mad. Because Eglinton Lawrence, with about 25,000 Jewish residents, has the third largest Jewish population of any riding in Canada, and like other places in the country, have seen 2.5 years of rising anti-Semitism, including arson at Jewish businesses and synagogues, shots fired at schools, hateful counter-protests each weekend at Bathurst and Shepherd, foiled bomb threats, and terrorist plots by alleged ISIS-linked supporters. After a visit to Sharei Shemayim to see the bullet holes for himself and meet the rabbi and staff, Gasparro joined the Liberals' Jewish caucus in the House of Commons, standing together behind Canada's Minister for Public Safety last week to announce a special grant of $10 million for Jewish security operations in the country, most for Toronto's community-run JSN, the rest split between Montreal and the rest of the country. And Gasparro hints there will be more to come in the spring economic update. And while he wouldn't go so far as to call the trio of synagogue shootings a terrorist attack or promise to deploy the army to patrol the Jewish areas like some European cities are now doing, Gasparro says it's now a national security incident, not just a local police matter, and likely linked to tensions overseas. Now, as Parliamentary Secretary to the federal government's junior minister responsible for combating crime, Gasparro has been closely involved in efforts to strengthen bail laws, to expand policing powers, including access to smartphones and social media, and to crack down on hate crimes. But he says what happened in his riding shows more needs to be done. I'm Ellen Besner, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Friday, March 20th, 2026. Welcome to North Star, the flagship podcast of the Canadian Jewish News, made possible thanks to the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky-Gluskin Charitable Foundation. Gasparro campaigned on a promise to protect the Jewish community and to fight anti-Semitism. He says that commitment isn't something new. He grew up in North York playing rugby with many Jewish friends, and when he attended York University, he opposed the student council BDS movement there that was so prominent in the 1990s. His Parliament Hill office has a specially blessed mezuzah affixed to the door, made out of pieces of the broken stained glass salvaged from Toronto's Kehillat Sharei Torah congregation, the synagogue targeted by 10 anti-Semitic attacks since October 7th. There's a second mezuzah in his home office. He calls them his reminders of his responsibility to the Jewish neighborhoods and to the Iranian diaspora here, too. Gasparro narrowly won the Eglinton Lawrence election for the Liberals, taking over the seat from longtime MP Marco Mendicino, who retired from federal politics. He also inherited Mendicino's constituency office at Bathurst and Lawrence, which is where our interview took place just a few days ago. Thank you for giving us the time. When the synagogues were targeted, you were in Washington, I think, and doing other parliamentary things. When you first heard about this, how did you first hear about the shootings, and what went through your mind?
Well, I think like a lot of people, I learned about it via social media, X in particular. And obviously, my heart dropped because where my mind automatically went was, was anyone injured or killed? That was sort of piece one. Once those fears were addressed, my next thought went to what's going on. We need to find these cowards who did this, and we need to put them away. Very emotional reaction. So the good news is I had spoken to the leadership of the Toronto Police Service that week because there had been some other incidents that have been...
They weren't in your riding, though. This
No,
isn't your riding.
no.
But next door.
Yeah, they were not in my riding, but I still communicated with the Toronto Police. Obviously, we have a vibrant Jewish community here in Eglinton Lawrence, and I wanted to make sure that The Toronto Police Service was aware that anything I could do or my office could do, or if they needed any sort of federal resources that I could work within our national security apparatus, anything I could do, I would. And they had told me they were adding additional resources into our area and other areas where there are members of the community. So I had some line of sight from a public safety, national security perspective where that the Toronto police and other law enforcement were deploying resources.
You said other law enforcement. Do you want to tell me what that mean, like RCMP, OPP,
Yeah, well,
instead?
yeah, I can't speak to provincial law enforcement, but I can tell you that the RCMP works very closely with the Toronto Police Service, and I think post shooting, the relationship, at least from an intelligence perspective, is continuing. Is continuing to proceed and actually has been increased from that end. I think it's very good. But coming back to the emotional sort of reaction, it is completely unacceptable that any community group is being targeted here in Canada because of a foreign conflict happening on the other side of the planet.
Do we know this, that was the motivation, like, or you don't? You're just
No, I'm listen, I may be connecting dots that don't exist. I don't think I am. I don't think it takes a PhD in foreign affairs or I need to be Henry Kissinger to think that it's being linked, what's happening in Iran and other conflicts in the region are, being used as an excuse to terrorize and intimidate the Jewish community. You know, again, I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to figure that out.
Do you think that list that was called Find IDF Soldiers and that has those two synagogues, your writing and the one in Thornhill, you know which list I'm talking about from the Maple?
Yeah, more.
They're the only two, and they were. Has that gone through your office, your mind? You have anything to say about that?
Look, we can speculate all the way down the line. Is it possible? For sure, but I don't have any concrete.
Because I heard the RCMP is investigating this thing. This set now. Do you know?
It's better that I don't comment on any potential ongoing investigation, and I use the word potential on purpose.
Back to this synagogue that's in your writing.
Sure.
You actually went to the synagogue a few days after the shooting. When you got there, what struck you?
Mhm.
What stays with you?
So I was with Rabbi Taylor and his team were very generous with their time. They took me on a private tour of the shul. I wanted to see the bullet holes for myself.
I haven't seen it inside. What does it look? What did you see?
Well, listen, the
Because they hadn't fixed it yet.
no, no, absolutely not. The doors. These are thick wooden doors, and there are holes, bullet holes, right through there. And some of the gunshots hit some of the brick and concrete on the outside. But look, if there had been congregants in the shul, someone would have been hit. Some of the bullets went right through the door and went into the open area,
Like the lobby.
the lobby and past. So, someone would have been hit. And it's a stark reminder of the threat the community is under. And all levels of government, we have to work together to solve this. There isn't one level of government that can do this on their own. We have a constitution in this country. As the federal government, we don't enforce the laws, right? That's the province and the municipal police forces. And if the federal government has to enforce the laws, that means the army's on the street and people are locked in their homes.
Should the army be coming a little bit? Would you think that's what's called for now?
Well, what I think is we need to have, at least at this point, there needs to be federal support to our local police so they can do their work to catch these, and I keep calling them cowards because they are cowards, to catch these cowards who did this. And I'd like to see continued and increased intelligence sharing. My view is, and this is just my personal opinion as Vince Gasparro, the MP for Eglinton Lawrence, this has crossed the line from a public safety issue to a national security issue. Because like I said, you don't need to be Henry Kissinger to have a view that there is some type of foreign interference here, and there are foreign actors and foreign agents who are using a foreign conflict as an excuse to terrorize members of the Canadian Jewish community.
You use the word terrorize. Nobody's called this a terror attack. Do you think this was terror? A week before Detroit, which was?
For sure. And then you had the situation in Norway. You had a situation in, was it Amsterdam? There was a firebombing of a Jewish school.
They took credit for that, though. The Islamic groups took credit for those. But here,
Yeah.
are we going there? Are we saying it's terror?
Well, obviously, there is a very strict definition of what terror is. What I will say is that, from my estimation, I think we should not be afraid to say that this now crosses into a national security incident, and we need to make sure there are federal resources available to the local police force so they can do their police work.
So what do those mean? That's what I want to know. What did the rabbis and the staff ask you for? Or you can share even though,
Yeah, look,
when you were there. What did they ask
sure. Look, there is some of this where if someone has a private conversation with me, I can't, like I can't be, saying it on a podcast a few days later. There has to be some.
Can't blame a girl for trying.
Yeah, I listen. I respect the effort. I respect the effort for sure. But what I will say is, and I was there on Saturday. I spoke to the congregation. Members of the congregation were very happy that I showed up, that I continue to show support for the community, and people are appreciative of the effort I think our federal government is making on the law and order piece writ large. Bail reform, the Combating Hate Act. We just introduced legislation on lawful access.
Till C-22.
Bill C-22, that's right, which will do a number of things, including making sure our police and national security apparatus have timely intelligence. One of the big pieces of that legislation, it gives the Minister of Public Safety the power to directly track a threat via their personal device. And that's the prerogative and the power of the minister. So I think you're seeing an overhaul of our public safety and national security legislative regime to the likes we haven't seen in many years.
I think our listeners would be stunned to know that Canadian law enforcement didn't until now have the kind of power to like go find who the shooter is by stalking their accounts, their Facebook, or dark web. I'm shocked at that. And when I read that yesterday, preparing for this interview, I couldn't believe we were the only country in the Five Eyes that didn't have that, or G7 even.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's ridiculous. And look, I don't want to make this a partisan thing. The fact is, the Conservatives, as of now, and I'm stressing the as of now part, we have a minority government. The Conservatives were blocking this, and their view was free speech.
You're talking about the combating hate, or if Bill C-22 is different.
Well, no, because lawful access was also portions of lawful access, excuse me, in the Strong Borders Act, Bill C-2, and they were rallying against it because free speech needs to trump everything according to the Conservatives. Anyways, we are going to make sure our national security apparatus and public safety institutions and law enforcement have the tools they need to deal with threats in the 21st century. And to your point, our country hasn't updated this in decades, and we're going to make these changes, and we're going to make sure our national security apparatus and law enforcement have the tools they need, and they tell us they need this. And it's just not on terror related incidents. We're also talking about child exploitation, which is also important to the community, obviously. We're also talking about drug trafficking, fentanyl, like that. There are all these other public safety issues that greatly impact the Canadian Jewish community that they expect us to move on. And just because the Conservatives hold free speech above all else, to me, that is not a good enough reason to update our legislative agenda to deal with the threats of the 21st century.
You were at the synagogue, but I also watched as you were in the, I guess, lobby of the House of Commons on March 10th, which was when Gary Ananda Sangari and all the kind of Jewish caucus where people have Jewish writings or Jewish population in their riding stood and announced $10 million in emergency funding.
Yes.
I would love if you walked us through what that was like, how that got done, how that quick, because he was here on the Sunday at the press conference, and then 4 or 5 days later, the money comes. Can you give us some background on how this happened and what it was like
Sure.
there?
So we were talking about this for a while. What I will say is the objectives of our new government, especially with Prime Minister Carney, is how do we become more efficient in getting capital to the people who need it on the ground in a timely fashion. And the timely fashion piece, I think, is critical. Again, I don't think I'd be the first Canadian to say all levels of government speed is not their our strong suit. Um, so I think we're trying to explore with ways to get again capital out quickly. So I think approximately 2/3 of that 10 million is going to the JSN, which I think is excellent. They do incredible work. And over the summer, Gary Andesangri, myself, we toured the JSN facility on the campus of the UJ in North York, and it was incredible work. Left an impression.
Does it look like it's on TV with all these monitors and like agents sort of scanning? What does it look like? We've never been there.
But you should get
They
a.
won't let us. So it's
Oh,
we
okay.
tried. We've asked for 2 years. But what
Okay.
does it look like? I know what the American one looks like, and it
Yeah,
looks
well,
like on TV,
like
like
a
a war
command
room.
center.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's very similar. It's very, very similar, and you ultimately have the CTV cameras from schools and schools all being fed into one central location. You have constant monitoring, you have constant threat assessments, and it's very, very good, it's very professional.
So this money that is like 2/3 of it that you said, is this going for like 90 days of security guards? What is this actual money going to be, and when is it being delivered?
So my understanding is it's happening immediately, and it is going to go to the JSN to help them with operational costs. It's going to help them with other expenditures to make sure the community has the specific support. And I do want to say this is the first time, it may even be ever, uh, don't necessarily quote me on that, where funding is going specifically for the Jewish community when it comes to a public safety matter. Like this is specific. This is specifically
That's true.
earmarked.
That is true. They did say it of 2023. You're right. So it's not for security guards in Montreal or elsewhere or anything else equipment. It's just to help these security operations that are already existing function better. So no armed guards, things like that.
So the armed guards, and I know there's some in the community who are calling for that. My understanding is there would need to be federal and provincial legislative changes for that. So again, you're dealing with multi-jurisdictional considerations. What I will say though is the model that we are using for the JSN here in Toronto is somewhat similar to what we were doing in Montreal, where we would provide capital to the federation out in Montreal, and then it would sort of be distributed from there. So we have tried this model before, and the JSN and the UJA obviously very professional, very good. Like they're beyond reproach. Like there is a high degree of confidence.
But their guards aren't armed, and so they're older people and volunteers. What else is coming? Because one of your colleagues that I interviewed last week said there's more coming, Anthony. So can you say what is coming?
So we have the spring economic update. All I can really say is pay close attention to that. But from a legislative perspective, we talked about Bill C-22, the lawful access. Again, that's very much a forward. It's not defensive. It's offensive, which I think is critical. And I think that's what the community is looking for, an offensive response to the challenges we're facing as a country. So that's part one. I talked about bail reform, talked about the Combating Hate Act, which,
Next week is going to be in Parliament
correct.
for third reading and
And
moving on.
obviously, it's our government bill. We are going to drive it forward. I will say there are some on the right wing of the community saying, oh, well, the Combating Hate Act wouldn't have done anything. Well, where the Combating Hate Act would have done something is on the protests at Bathurst and Shepherd, where people were holding up some of those signs. Some of those signs and images could be, again, I don't want to preempt the police, any of the work the police could do, but if the Combating Hate Act was passed, law enforcement could have used some of the provisions in the Combating Hate Act to go after the people that had some of those images up. It could have been used.
Why? Because they already are anti-Semitic and fomenting hate and Section 318, Section 319, and they just aren't. So why these would do that?
Well,
Because the symbol of hate
yes.
is now, but they weren't Hezbollah flags and they weren't Hamas or Samidun. They were just horrible caricatures of Jews with big noses and
But
other things.
for sure, but the Combating Hate Act, and the police have told us this, by the way. Like, I want to be clear. This isn't just politicians sitting in a room saying, hey, what piece of legislation can we put together that we think law enforcement needs? Law enforcement has communicated to us they need this, right? So again, when the conservatives say none of this would help, it's ridiculous. The professionals in the field, the men and women in uniform, their leadership have said, we need this. Our national security apparatus has said, we need this, and that's who we're listening to. We're not listening to conservative politicians who have ulterior motives, political motives, why they don't want this.
It's going to take a while. It's going to go to the Senate. So until then, what do you want done with these hateful protests? That's 2.5 years at Bathurst. It's not your riding, but it's close.
Yeah, it's not, you're right, it's not Eglinton Lawrence, but it is close. Let's start with this. To municipal police forces, enforce the law. Not everything has to be about de-escalation, right? There's this premise in law enforcement that everything has to be about de-escalating the situation. The problem, and by the way, I have no issue with that. If there's an opportunity to de-escalate a sensitive situation, the police should be doing it. What I am going to say is when people's confidence and trust in our ability, when I mean our, I mean Toronto in this case, or York region, etc., their ability to enforce the law and try people is being put into question. That, to me, is a much bigger issue.
But that's the Crowns. I did a whole story about that yesterday, that they're dropping 40 to 50%, sometimes 60% of the charges in these anti-Semitic. You're not a provincial politician,
Right.
but I'm just saying the numbers are, they withdraw them all or they divert them.
Right. And I'm glad you mentioned the province. That's where every level of government has to do a better job of ensuring that people who commit crimes are being arrested, are being charged, and are facing the consequences. And that's why all of our legislative changes at the federal level are so important.
Al-Quds Day parade.
Yep.
You are in federal parliamentary secretary for security. What do you make of the provincial government's effort to last minute get an injunction and fail, and then the parade went on?
Yep.
What do you think should have happened or should happen?
So there was a tweet from the premier that made its rounds on social media. I probably had maybe 50 people send it to me where Premier Ford made a commitment 8 years ago to stop the Al-Quds Day rally. And, after 8 years made a last minute effort to get an injunction. I guess one way to look at it is at least he tried on the one hand. On the other, someone could ask, well, what were you doing for the previous 8 years?
Well, you tweeted about it, so Doug Ford has been all talk and no action for the last 7 years. You said that.
I think that was during the provincial campaign.
So what's the difference now that you're a federal MP? You changed your mind on that?
No.
Okay.
I'll stand behind things I've said. I have no issue with it. What I will say is all levels of government have to work together on a whole slew of things. And the problem with public safety specifically is we have a constitution. Different levels of government have different responsibilities. So an Al-Quds Day rally, that's not something for the federal government to manage. That has to be the province and the local police force.
What you can manage, though, are some people who you may have seen. Mullah got off the airplane at Pearson Airport from Iran, and it was identified, and then led the parade the next day. What can you tell the community about how not just Jewish issues, but the Iranian community's worries about these agents that your minister said there were 28 IRGC in Canada, we can't deport them because... So what message should we be taking from what's going to be done?
So you're right. I think Minister Andesangri did say there's 28 members, and there's plenty of law enforcement action that can be taken.
Give me two. How did he get a Canadian passport, this guy?
So the specific case, I don't know. I don't know when he got his passport, when he became a citizen. It could have been over many years. But look, every government has to work within the confines of the Constitution and the courts. So as frustrating as I may find it, and you may find it, and others may find it, we're a country of laws. We have to deal with it. For example, a former central banker in Iran who stole, I think, $2.6 billion, got citizenship when Stephen Harper was prime minister, and the conservative government wasn't able to get him out of the country, and neither was a liberal government. So there are complexities here that both liberals and conservatives, whenever they have been in power, have to manage. It's not an excuse. It's just, we deal with the world as it is, not the way we wish it to be. So that's what we are working with. What I will say, though, is we have a robust process in place that people have confidence in, that when we order someone or have deemed someone ineligible to enter the country, that there's a process in place.
Last September, a few months into his first term, Gasparro made headlines when he announced the pro-Palestine Irish hip-hop band Kneecap was being banned from entering Canada because of its public support for terrorist groups like Hezbollah and Hamas. The band's Canadian gigs were cancelled. Hate charges against the band have recently been dropped in both British and Irish courts, and now they're suing Gasparro. Coming up, he'll explain why he made that announcement and how he handled the backlash.
Kneecap, they're suing you. I read the Kneecap issue. Can you walk us through what your response to that is and where we're at with this case?
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. So there isn't anything formal, like a formal lawsuit, What will be, will be.
What lesson can we take from what happened with you on that? What happened?
Look, at the end of the day, decisions in terms of who comes into the country and who doesn't are decisions that are made by our professional public service. Politicians don't decide who should come into the country and who shouldn't. What I tell my members of the community who, were very, very happy that I made that announcement, what I said to them was, you don't want me making decisions. You might like the decision today because of who's sitting in the seat, but, you may not.
So do you regret that whole video? Because they just got off in England on a technicality of not being charged. Do you regret doing that, or did you get in trouble for that? You got a lot of backlash.
Well, the question I would say is who did I get the backlash from? But
The opposition.
yeah, but I'm going to come back to the ultimate fact here, right? The bottom line is this: the professional public service always makes the decision in terms of who comes into the country and who can't. And that's the way it should be. So the spin that was coming out from some is that, Vince made the decision to have these people banned from coming to the country is completely inaccurate. Now, if at some point people are coming into the country that people aren't necessarily happy with, then rules and regulations can be changed, laws can be changed, but the decision should always be based on the public service. And what I will say about Kneecap, and the minister said this in the House, and that is anyone who's been deemed ineligible to enter the country is free to reapply. And the professional public service then makes a new determination. Process has to be followed, and whatever future decision the public service makes on Kneecap or anyone else, I will respect that decision.
I appreciate this really extended interview, and next time we'll do it in Italian.
Wow.
So we have a lot to talk about.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
And that's what Jewish Canada sounded like for this episode of North Star, made possible thanks to the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky Gluskin Charitable Foundation. Next week, we'll do a deep dive into Bill C-9, the Combating Hate Act, why the Liberals say it'll protect Jews, but the opposition Conservatives say it won't. If you like this episode, please text it or share it with someone who needs to hear it. Our show is produced by Zachary Judah Kaufman and Andrea Varsany, with Michael Freeman as the executive producer, Alicia Richler as the editorial director, and Brett Higgins, who did the music. And thanks for listening.